Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today I'd like to have a few comments on the current situation in Syria under the title Who Wants What in Syria? And the most important question is, why did President Putin fail to support the regime of Bashar al-Assad? So let's do the questions. The questions that are key here is why Putin let go of Assad. Second, what do the foreign actors want? And that is the Turks, the main participants, the Israelis, and the Americans, the external factors, the external players. And finally, what do these factions want? The mosaic of Syria and what each of them wants. And finally, the conclusion would be, what are the consequences? What is going to happen next? Now, I start with the first question, and that is why the Russians failed to act. Well, the answer is that they didn't fail to act. They did act. They started the bombing campaign. They sent in instructors. In fact, the Iranians also sent detachments, and everybody thought that they would stop the offensive of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group somewhere around Hama. But the truth is that when they did arrive, there were some Iranian detachment. They realized very quickly that the Syrian army was not in the mood to fight. And it disappeared, any resistance disappeared very quickly. The same thing with the Russians. What I saw yesterday was very interesting discussion on Solovyov. He interviewed some people who actually fought in Syria in 2015. And the outcome was that what these people told us was that the Syrian army was packed by people closest to Bashar al-Assad, that they were all from his area, from his village, that he replaced all the commanders that actually did the fighting in 2015 because he was so afraid of conspiracies and coup attempts, and that it was virtually corrupt, that essentially each time there would be a territory under control of the so-called Syrian army, they would have their block posts and collect money from the people who would come by. In other words, Assad regime tried to hold together the mosaic of various tribes and various religious groups, which I will discuss a little later. And for a while it worked with the help of the Iranians and the Russians. But in the end, this regime collapsed. When I see the pictures of looting the palace and the total collapse of state power, I cannot I cannot help thinking of the situation in Russia in 1917. The Tsar is no more, and all of a sudden there was a vacuum of power. There was essentially chaos, and everybody was trying to take a piece. Both the domestic groups and the foreigners, the Germans intensified their offensive on the Eastern Front and took all of Ukraine and half of Russia, came up close to St. Petersburg. And then there was a domestic trouble with all kinds of terrorist groups vying for power. One of them, the Bolsheviks, seized finally power half a year later. This may in fact happen, which is big danger of a civil war in Syria now. But let me get back to what I was saying earlier. So the answer to the first question, Putin did try, but then when when he realized that it's useless, that the Syrian army disappears, then all he could do is just offer protection to himself and to his family. Now, the same thing with Iranians. What also I found out yesterday in some reports is that the Iranians did send the warning actually to Assad about things that were going to happen, and Assad ignored or couldn't undertake anything. So let's move to the foreign actors. The major ones are the Turks, the Israelis, and the Americans. So what do the Turks want? The Turks want to control the Kurdish area, and this is a very, very long and dramatic story. But the point is that about a third of Turkey itself, it consists of the Kurds, who are suppressed, repressed. They're not allowed to have their language, their identity. They're forcibly Turkanized. This is a separate and a long story. But the thing is that in Syria, northeastern corner of Syria are the Kurds, and there's a lot of them. They're about a third of Syria as well, and they've been enjoying a de facto autonomy, primarily supported by the U.S. forces that are still there. The U.S. actually has a stake in there, and the U.S. interest is to control the corridor between Iran, Iraq, and Syria. This is one. To have a leverage over the Turks, that's number two. And also to count as a counterweight to the Russian presence in Syria, which is on the Mediterranean basis. So this was the U.S. interest. The Turkish interest was to use the groups in the Kurds and among the radical Islamists under their control in order to provide this kind of a leverage over the Kurdish population. And some people say that in the end, it's not only a matter of control, but also of perhaps creating a buffer zone or even annexing part of Kurdish territories of Syria to Turkey. Now, the Israelis, to what extent they were involved in the recent events is unclear, but it seems that they are interested in disrupting the corridor of support between Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon and in southern Syria. And from that point of view, they've succeeded quite well. In other words, recent events did disrupt Hezbollah, and they did disrupt, and they did manage to weaken Iran's influence in the events in Syria. From that point of view, they've succeeded. But, and here is the big but the people who came to power now in Syria, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. These people are Islamicists. They dream of a caliphate. They dream of an Islamic state. They fought against the leader of these guys, fought the U.S. in Iraq and its former al-Nusra. And these are not the friends of Israel. In fact, I would say that compared to these people, Israelis had a pretty good and peaceful neighbor in the person of Assad. Now they're going to face radical Islamist extremists, and definitely not friends of Israel. And we shall see whether they will not regret the overthrow of Assad in the long term. So these are the foreigners. And now let me speak briefly about the domestic composition of the situation in Syria. Syria is a mosaic. This is pretty much like many countries in the region that have two or three major groups, such as in Iraq, that there's just Sunnis and Shias. There's many more in Syria, and that makes it very complicated. So briefly, it goes like this. If you look at the map of Syria, the core of it in the center are Sunni Muslims. And the radicalized part of the Sunni Muslims are those guys that came to power now. On the fringes, on the edges, there are all kinds of minorities. And if we go to the northwest, the Latakia, this is where the Russian bases are. This is the home base of Alawites, and this is the tribe or the minority of Assad and his family. These are an offshoot of the Shias. and they are obviously a minority concentrated in that northwest corner. Now, north of that, Idlib province is the home base of the radical Islamists who have actually descended from that territory to Aleppo and then further down to Hama. So this is the Turkish-based radical Islamists, Sunnis. Now, if we move east, there begins the Kurdish territory, right along the Turkish border, and then further on to the Iraqi border. This is the huge area of the Turks, and as I said, they the huge territory of the Kurds, who are fighting the Kurds, and the PKK, Erdogan considers this to be a terrorist organization. In fact, it is no more terrorist than the one that he supports, but all they seek is independence of Kurdistan. And this is a long, decades-long struggle for maybe one day the Kurds will succeed, maybe not, in creating a Kurdish state. And this is the nightmare for Erdogan because, as I said, about a third of Turkey consists of the Kurds. Now, if we go down to the south, then there is the area of Arabs who are Sunnis and who are on the border with Jordan, and they are also supported by the United States, and there are U.S. based there as well. And finally, the Christians who have a territory next to the Alawites and south of Turkey. This is south of Aleppo. This is an area that historically was Christian for many centuries and that has suffered immense damage during the civil wars of 2011, 2015. And many of them have left. In fact, I have met some of them and talked to them, and they've been actually quite friendly to the Russians because they thought that it was the Russian interference that saved the Christians from decimation by the radical Islamists. In any case, so this is the mosaic. Now, obviously, the victory of the radical Islamists will not create any peace. That's the whole point. The best way to summarize the situation, it is going to be a tribal war, a religious war for the foreseeable future, just as it is in Libya. Gaddafi was destroyed, and what do we have? All these years since then, there's a civil war. The country exists no more. It is split at least in three parts, each of them claiming to be a president of Libya, and nothing changes. The chaos reigns. Now, this is probably what is going to happen in Syria. This is what President Putin said he wanted to avert, the kind of a chaos in Syria as in Lebanon, but in the end, the opponents prevailed, and chaos now will reign in Syria. If the current group manages to establish itself firmly in power and create institutions of power and be able to accommodate other groups as they promised to, this would only mean more trouble for Israel and for the United States because these are radical Islamists who dream of a caliphate. So I can congratulate Mr. Biden and Mr. Netanyahu with a great victory to promoting to power the enemies of Christianity, the enemies of Jews, the enemies of Israel. Now they are reigning supreme in Syria. That's the situation as I see it now. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.